Officers overrid it when his inexcusable action turned into a moment of, well, now I gotta arrest you? I had a guy falsify his information because he thought he had a warrant. The guy whose information he gave me had a felony warrant. After I slap on the cuffs, he tells me he lied and gives me his real information. He did not have a warrant. He did go to jail for falsification though. My father-in-law was police, retired. He once had a guy in who gave my address during the intake. Can you imagine as a police officer someone giving your daughter's address? I was a park ranger and we used to have a bunch of kids who liked to sit on a hill and smoke weed. Now they walked in and out and were just goofy kids and basically behaved, so I left them be until Travis came along. Travis had a joint in his hand as I walked up. He was told to toss it in the drain. Travis takes a big Olay hit and exhaled in my face. I still let it go but began to simmer. He pinches the cherry and tries to pocket the joint. That was it. Travis gets clipped. Dumbass had an ounce in his sock and several blunts in his pocket. Stupid. Honestly, I'm impressed by your patience here. This was a kid I went to school with. He is a whack job and always has been. He was expelled from my middle school for writing bomb threats. A couple years ago. He was 19 I think. A member of his family found a gun that he had and turned it into the police. All he had to do was either ignore it and lose his gun or go in and prove that he had paperwork to back it up. Instead he chose to go in and claim to be a Homeland Security agent, with a fake badge to back it up. Police searched his home and found an arsenal of weapons and explosives. That's a new kind of stupid right there. Not Leo, but have a great story. Officer is off duty and taking wife to get ice cream. Walks up to window, kid sees guy and recognizes him as a cop. Crap, I knew you guys would show up at some point. Cop had no idea what kid was taking about, but played along. You really should have known. Will this go easy? What can you tell me? The more you're honest, the better it could be for you. Kid proceeds to spill guts about being a driver for a B&D that happened recently. Cop calls in for a cruiser, arrests the kid, and never got his ice cream. Added bonus. Some people think that after being arrested that if you aren't read your Miranda rights that they can't use anything you say. Miranda only applies to questioning after arrest. If you mouth off in the backseat after being arrested but the cop never asks you anything, everything you say can be used as evidence. An ex-roommate of mine decided to stop off in a town she wasn't familiar with on her way home from work to smoke some pot with some friends she'd met recently. After staying just long enough to smoke a bunch, she drove down the road, not paying attention, and swerved right in front of a cop. I've since visited this town, and it very much has a vibe of pulls you over high. Do you need directions? I'd bet that's what the cop was thinking when he pulled her over. She managed to escalate this to refusing to take a breathalyzer, to yelling at the cop for harassing her, to pinching the guy when he cuffed her. I was on a lease with this person, and didn't want to be responsible for her part of the rent, so I drove out and bailed her out after midnight on a weekday so that she could go to work the next day. Bail, of course, started off as $40 for a traffic violation and escalated to several hundred when it turned out she had technically assaulted an officer, and the next day she goes to work with a bad attitude, gets fired, and goes back to the same town and gets pulled over again. Not a cop, but saw a guy get escorted off a bus for playing his music device too loudly and I guess having his feet up on a seat. Wow, didn't respond to the driver. When the police had him off of the bus, he went with them calmly. There were 3 cops. They were talking to him, and suddenly he takes a swing at one of them. That was one fast takedown. I saw some drunk dumbass on Live PD get the cops called on him at a hotel for breaking the window or something. The owner just wanted him to leave. He straight up tells the cops he has warrants and they're like, we don't care about any of that, just leave the premises and go about your night. But you just would not leave, so the cops had to arrest him. Like, bruh, you were getting an unbelievable break, not being charged with anything or taken to jail and still wanted to argue and stay there. Reminds me of the time on Live PD when an officer stopped a woman from speeding and another car stopped and the woman tried to talk to the woman speeding. She wasn't even involved and because she wouldn't leave the officer had to arrest her. Not a police officer, but years ago a guy called the cops and asked how much trouble he would get in if he was caught growing marijuana. 2 hours later an officer shows up to his house and arrests him for growing marijuana. Splendid example of natural cause and effect. I'm not a cop but I work in EMS. Some lady gave Narcan to her buddy who OD'd and then gave a cop a fake ID name. She would have had immunity from possession charges since she called out of medical need for someone else. She didn't even have warrants on her real name. Paranoia is nasty. I would be worried that at that moment I am on their radar. Not today but they will get me later kinda thing. Was a cop. Best one that immediately comes to mind was a kid who was speeding. Nothing crazy, just like 10 miles per hour over. Pulled him over and was in the process of giving him a warning when I noticed he had a radar detector. I point at it and he smiles and confidently says it's okay. You can have one if you have a permit. Do you have a permit? Comma, number, ticket. Sorry bud. Not a cop. Like half the posters. I had just gotten off a flight and picked up a rental car and was leaving the airport area heading out to another town about 2 hours away. It was late at night and I was not paying attention to speed limits. Took off from a red light. I don't recall doing it with any expediency, but again I wasn't paying attention. The car next to me did the same thing. A cop whipped a U-turn and came up behind the both of us to pull both of us over. I pulled off pretty quickly, but the other guy didn't, so the cop followed him. I got back on the road and caught back up to the cop who had pulled the other guy over, and the cop waved for me to also pull over so I did. I had my license, my rental agreement for the car, and just sat and waited. That was when I saw the guy in the other car throwing things out of his window, which I later realized was his license. A lot more cops showed up really quickly. One came over to my car. I handed him my license and he literally asked me, "Why did you stop? There was only one cop here." I told him it didn't seem like a smart idea to try to get through the immigration checkpoint 20 miles up the road, South Texas, when radio exists. He laughed, walked away for a bit and came back to my window and told me to drive safe. As I was pulling away they were arresting the other guy who was yelling and thrashing at the cops. It was a simple traffic stop. I didn't even get an official warning. Other dude was in cuffs. Just be nice to cops. Not a cop, but we heard some rumbling around in the garage. We left the garage door open on accident, and when I went to check, there was a 18-year-old girl drunk off her butt standing in my garage. BTW, if you think you're going to be a big bad butt when there's an intruder in your home, think again because I screamed like a little girl. Seeing that it was a young girl and my life wasn't in immediate danger, I called the cops while my wife and Mill got her story. Turns out the neighbors had a small party and kicked her out for being in butt. She wandered into my garage to steal cigarettes. The cops show up and tell her that she can go home with her mom since I decided to not press charges. Mom convinces her to get in the car. They start to drive off while we are making small talk with the officers. The mom gets the drunk girl in the car and to the end of the block, 4 houses down, and she opens the door and runs. The cops take off after her telling us thanks but she's going to jail now. I just think about what a chance the officers and I gave this young lady to go home free and clear and she screwed it up. Pretty much every sovereign citizen digs themselves a hole when they get stopped. What could be a simple speeding ticket warning escalates into multiple tickets and usually a criminal charge for resisting arrest. Also, if you're having a verbal argument and you call the cops, it's probably not a good idea to tell someone else you're going to kill them while the cops are present. That's the easiest lockup you'll ever get. Not a cop, however. I was severely drunk one night about 2 blocks away from my buddy's house. Got stopped by the cops as I was walking to his place. I got completely ignorant. No, I won't show you my ID. No, I won't sit down. No, I won't, etc. Needless to say, I spent a good 12 hours in the drunk tank when he would have given me a ride the rest of the way if I would have shut the F up. I had a friend in high school that brought his bag of weed with him to school. Being the scholar that he is, he hid his bag in a line of bushes on the median in front of our school. After school gets out, he is frantically searching the bushes for his stash. Guy comes up and says looking for something, where my friend replies, "Yeah man, my sack." You got one guess to who found it first? This happened 2 nights ago. I stop a car because his license plate light is out. Must be visible from 60 feet or less. No biggie. Operators not going to know this unless we stop them, and most often, we're just probing for a more serious offense. 10/10 give a verbal warning for this infraction. I request a license and registration per policy and the operator then demands to know why I stopped them. I advise them that per department policy, I don't have to tell them until I obtain their license and registration as I request a second time. Operator then goes off about how they know their civil rights and what I must do on a traffic stop. I advise the operator that it's an arrestable offense and insert my state for failure to submit to a police officer your license and registration upon lawful request and that I have to ask you exactly one time before I can charge you with failure to submit, so for the third and final time, please provide me with your license and registration. Operator again goes off about his civil rights. I ask if he's sure he doesn't want to give me his driver's license and registration. He again refuses and gets himself arrested for a stupid plate light. Turns out he wasn't licensed and didn't have a license to give, but he could have said that. Either way, he was going to be charged with something. Mayo, so basically his civil rights were that he was not supposed to be frickin' driving. Not sure if this is what you meant, but stopped a guy as his car showed as having no insurance. He was super confused about the whole thing. Positive he had insurance and was full of the "I've never been stopped by the police before," which was probably true. Either way, ran some checks with the insurance people and yeah, turns out he was insured, just wasn't showing up for some reason. He's still apologetic. Sorry for wasting our time. Nice guy all round. We are literally getting back into our car and the guy is suddenly walking back and saying, "I honestly do have insurance. I'm always honest. Like, I had a few drinks earlier too, you should probably know." Look at my colleague with a shared look of disbelief. Slowly get back out the car and breathalyze the guy and yep, almost twice over the limit. Promptly arrested for drink driving. He didn't smell one whiff of booze and seemed fully sober to both of us. What on earth compelled him to tell us as we were leaving that he'd been drinking? I'll never know. We had an undercover store cop in our grocery and business was slow, so he checked the parking lot and found a guy working on his car. The store cop were checking on him and even helped him work on it. When done, the driver pulled a bag of weed and offered to get him high, so he arrested him. The cop said the bag was too big to let him go. Not very cash money of the cop there. I don't get the people who argue with the cops. That almost never works out in their favor. And why turn a traffic stop into a night in jail? Don't they have better crap to do than sit in jail for a night? I always go the opposite route. 2 examples. Last summer, driving across several states on the way to the beach. I was speeding. 25 over. Got pulled over. Cop expected me to argue and bulls him. Instead, I said, "You got me fair and square. I'm just trying to get the family to the beach. No excuses." He came back and said he knocked it down to 9 miles per hour over, and to slow it down, the beach would still be there. Saved me hundreds of dollars and points on my license. He also complimented me on my truck, and we talked sports for a few minutes. It may have helped that I have military veteran plates. I dunno. In my state, if they run your plates and you have a concealed carry license, the cops are notified before they approach the vehicle. So, because I don't want to make them any more freaked out, I always turn off the engine, put the dome light on, window down, have my license and insurance ready, and have my hands easily visible. They always immediately ask if I have a weapon in the vehicle, and I don't. So I say no. They ask why I do all of those things, and I say so they know what's up and to make things easy for the both of us. They always seem to appreciate that, and usually ask a few questions and send me on my way. Do I have to do any of that crap? Number. Does it make things easier for everyone and get us both on our way faster? Yes. Attended a job in which a young girl had suicidal thoughts and wanted to speak to police. This of course immediately raises red flags. Once we turn up, her boyfriend answers the door and she is sitting on the couch as drunk as a skunk, and after a few minutes it's apparent that the main reason she called us was to get her boyfriend arrested for dealing drugs after they drunkenly got into an argument. She then stated she had suicidal thoughts and wanted to stab herself, which I believe was just a cry for attention. However, as police we tend to take those things seriously, so we call an ambulance for a mental health assessment. Once it seemed like we had calmed her down, she went to the kitchen to grab a glass of water and then tries to grab a giant knife and tries to stab herself. We have to wrestle with her to get the knife when her boyfriend that she was originally trying to throw under the bus jumped in and cries police brutality. Arrested, cuffed and had a nice holiday at the courthouse. Ice dealing boyfriend was yelling obscenities at us as we were walking out for treating her like a criminal. This was all because she wanted to use us as a scare tactic for her boyfriend. Sorry mom. Pro tip: lie about something bad that someone else is planning to do, not something about you. I'm thinking of killing myself equals locked up with no shoelaces. He's thinking of killing me equals he gets locked up. Not a cop, but around here a Hispanic man got pulled over for broken tail light, or something like that. The cop told him to get it fixed and was going to let him go. As the cop was about to walk away, the guy in the car said no see. Cop was like, excuse me, no see in back. Cop proceeds to ask the guy to step out of the car and to open the trunk. The entire trunk was filled to the brim with bricks of coke. Crazy that brilliant plan didn't work. Obligatory not a cop, but my buddy was drinking underage and decided to walk home. On the walk home a cop stopped him because he was obviously drunk. My buddy tried to convince the cop he was sober. Up to this point the cop was being polite and seemed like he might let him off with a warning about being underage and drunk in public. The cop took his id, saw he was underage and breathalyzed him. As soon as the cop said his BA was 0.18, my buddy said damn it, I was hoping for at least 20. The cop wrote him a ticket for minor in consumption very shortly afterwards. Very quickly noticed a trend of if you're dickhead to cops, they are gonna be dickheads to you, and you'll most likely end up in jail or with a hefty fine. Not an officer, but a guy I used to work with was a real dickhead, and amongst many other things, once left me stranded at a job site almost 2 hours from home with no way to get back. One night he got pulled over for speeding well over the limit. Cops were going to let him go with just a fine, no points, but he decides to argue and push the point. So the cops search his vehicle and find C, gets arrested, car impounded. He makes bail and promptly leaves the country to go to his home country. Guy wasn't a US citizen and now can't come back to the States ever again, or he'll be rearrested and charged with the drug offenses, the speeding charge, and skipping bail. Karma's a B. Doofus. Sounds more like he fled the US. Not an arrest but a citation. I was at house for a burglary call and asked the homeowner where the money had been taken from. He says the end table. I point to one of 2 end tables and ask this end table. He walks to the end table, says yeah, took it right out of this drawer and opens the drawer. I look at the open drawer and see the burglar was kind enough to leave the homeowner's ½ ounce of marijuana. Imagine if they planted the marijuana there because they knew the police would look there after they were called. Would be so next level and such a middle finger to the face. Not my story, but my uncle is a police officer. He was called in for suspicious behavior in an apartment. He and his partner went to knock on the door. The guy opens the door, blunt in hand, talking to some friend in another room. He turns to look at them, realizes they are officers and hides his hand behind his back. My uncle and his partner couldn't hold back a smile and shake of the head and said, "Alright buddy," and gets out the handcuffs. I know it's not exactly the situation you described, but it's still a good story and my uncle cracks up about it every time he tells the story. Not a cop, but was at my grandma's house once when we heard a crash outside. A couple who lived down the street got in a fight and the girlfriend jumped into their car and took off down the road at like 50 miles per hour in a residential zone filled with speed bumps. She went to hit the brakes but they locked up. She hit the speed bump and flipped the car over in the street. But boyfriend saw everything, runs up screaming for help. The neighborhood helps her out through the window and cuts the power to the engine while the police and ambulance arrive. The cops were mainly there just to take everyone's statement, but for some reason the boyfriend kept yelling at them and trying to walk his girlfriend away from the scene. They gave him several chances to just calm down but he wasn't having it. Eventually they ran his information and it revealed he had a warrant out for his arrest, so they took him in. I was at a house party. It was getting a bit out of control and someone had called the cops on it. I'm from the UK and cops going to house parties seems way rarer than in America, at least from what I've seen in media. This was the only time I've ever seen them show up, and they didn't even go in the house. They waited outside for the owner to come and asked them to start removing people. So the guy throwing the party turns the music off and says for people to leave. Some people leave, Some just start talking quietly, still buzzed on whatever. I was there with 2 friends and we decided frick it, party's dead and we're hungry, let's leave. So we go out the front door, and my one mate, who was hammered, goes over to one of the officers and I'm like, oh crap, what is he doing? He starts trying to chat crap with the officer. The guy is having none of it and says to leave, clearly trying to just do his job and disperse the party. Next thing I see is my mate put his arm around the cop and try and take a freaking selfie. Crossed a line there. Officer grabs his arm, puts it behind his back, and in a few seconds has my friend in the back of the car. Me and my other mate, up until this point we're laughing at our idiot. Suddenly are like, do we try and save him? Sheepishly we make our way over as well. Start apologizing, saying he's a moron, had too much. We'll take him home and put him to bed. At first the officer doesn't even look at us. Says he needs to cool off in a cell, but then relents and is like, fine. Take him straight home and I don't want to see any of you again tonight. Fantastic. So we get him out of the back, put our arms on him and steer him off back towards our place. Dumbass then remembers we were gonna get food. Takeaway places being back past the party, the way we'd came. We literally had to hold this guy back and say we'd give him some oven chips so he wouldn't run off and get himself arrested again. Best thing about it, dude couldn't remember nearly being arrested, thought we were making it up, didn't thank us until a mutual friend from the party sent us some pics of him in the back of the car. Not a copper, but me and a few mates were stopped by the police. Happens regularly in my area, and were told to empty out our pockets as there were reports of drug dealing in the area. So all of us but one agreed to the search, therefore resulting in him being arrested and ending up in a cell for most of the day. This was recently. Had a young guy, basically a teenager, chasing a neighbor around with a shovel. The suspect denied that he was, but admitted to confronting the neighbor because he was allegedly making crude comments about some of his girlfriends. Let him off with an intox public ticket and a warning. Less than 30 minutes after leaving we get called back by the neighbor who said he could hear the kid yelling and screaming again. Me and my partner show up and walk up to his house just in time to see him charging his roommate with a huge kitchen knife. We kicked in the door and the kid decided to drop the knife immediately, thank God. He was arrested and charged with assault with a weapon and some other stuff and given conditions not to return to his house. Keep shaking my head at this one. Not a cop, but my aunt got arrested because a cop saw her with some criminals and she had a warrant. Just got to love being related to people wanted by the FBI. Oh, yay. Gonna need some more details on this one. Not a cop, but once had a cop tell me about a frequent flyer the PD had. He was a young guy who had been arrested a bunch of times for minor stuff, never anything violent. The guy would frequently and loudly argue with his GF in their tiny apartment. It never got physical, but a few times it was loud enough to get complaints from other people in their building. The cops didn't think this guy was a danger, and even his GF said he never laid a hand on her. So one night they just tell him he's gotta clear out, find someplace else to stay for the night, cool off, and then he could come home. Guy insists he's got nowhere to go. Cops tell him to get a friend to come pick him up. Guy says no, nobody can come get me. You need to take me to jail because I have nowhere else to go. Cops tell him what he's done doesn't warrant an arrest. They go back and forth a few times. Guy finally pulls out a small knife and goes, "What about now? Can you take me to jail now, cops?" Yep, that'll do it. To me it sounds like a great way for an idiot to get himself shot, pulling a knife on the cops, but the officer I knew seemed to think the guy was just a harmless idiot. In college, friend got an underage. Cop asked for her license to verify her age. She gave him a fake, with the wrong name, underage, fake a ticket, and cop took it as far as to pursue identity theft. I learned studying criminal justice in college that police don't have to arrest you for misdemeanors, only obligated to for felonies. Can vary by state, city. Not a cop, but my cousin was picked up and taken home because he was wandering around drunk while underage. He was literally on his front porch and they were going to leave when he decided to try to fight the cops. My criminal justice teacher, a retired officer, has a few stories about how the person decides to argue about the situation instead of cooperating. He's had to take a few aggressive people down, and he's 5'3". If you decide to argue with a cop, you'll just get into more unnecessary trouble. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.